Recently, there has been a lot of gun-oriented news and a lot of focus on guns, gun safety, gun violence in America. I have noticed that there have been a few gun shows, and it seems that every time a gun goes off, it becomes national news. Particularly at the gun shows, there were a few what they would refer to as accidental discharges, or what is more properly referred to as negligent discharges. The story would report that there was an incident where a buyer came in, or a seller came in with his shotgun or his handgun, and then, quote, the gun went off, unquote. This, I believe, for somebody who is not familiar with guns, leads them to believe that somehow guns are able to just spontaneously go off on their own. And I wanted to make a short video about the operation of a variety of weapons and show how they are supposed to work and how their safety mechanisms work. There is a proper order and procedure for the care and handling of any firearm. Any firearm should be treated with respect and not treated lightly. Now, the first thing I want to really put the clamps on is this notion of the gun going off. Guns do not go off on their own. There is some form of human interaction that involves a gun going off. Now, there are 4 basic rules of firearm safety. Rule number 1 is always treat a gun as if it was loaded. Rule number 2 is keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to shoot. Rule number 3 is never point a gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. And rule number 4 is check your target and know what is beyond your target. Now, the proper application, yes, I may have gotten those rules out of order, but it's those 4 rules. The proper application of these rules will prevent the vast majority of any of negligent discharges. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible for a gun to go off on its own. I can't say never, but statistically speaking, the proper care and handling of any firearm will ensure the safety of the user and anyone around them. Most handguns have some kind of a safety mechanism on them. Newer handguns do not actually have manual safeties. Well, not all, but there are some newer handguns that don't have manual safeties, such as the Glock is a very common version. What we have here is a Beretta PX4 Storm, which has a manual safety as well as a variety of other internal safeties as well. We are more commonly referred to as drop safeties. Now, rule number 1 is always treat a gun as if it were loaded. We see this gun here, and by looking at it, to the casual observer, you can't tell if that gun is loaded or not. So the first thing we do is we assume that it's loaded. Now, since I'm not ready to fire this gun, I'm going to keep my finger away from the trigger, and if I want to make sure that I know if the gun is loaded, the first thing that I will do is keep my hand away from the muzzle. I know I've set this up in such a way that it's hard to do that, but a visual inspection, can't really tell. It's not like a revolver. You can't look at the front end of it and say, okay, there's a bullet in the chamber. Although on some guns you'll see that there will be like an extractor or something, say here, that would actually stick out a little bit. Now, in the case of a gun that we don't know if it's loaded or not, the first thing to do would be to depress the magazine release and check, okay, we don't have anything here. We'll set that aside for right now. And if you really want to know the safety, this gun has a manual safety right now. The safety is on. If it was in the fire position, there'd be a red dot. I'll show you that in a minute. But you want to take a little muscle behind the camera here. Pull it back and make sure that there is in fact nothing inside of the chamber, as we can see here. This is how you know that a gun is not loaded. Once a gun is in this position, we know that it is safe. You always, anytime you handle a unfamiliar gun, you always want to ensure yourself that it is loaded. Do not take somebody else's word for it. If you yourself have not verified that the gun is not loaded, you have to automatically assume that it is loaded. So we can put this back. Now, with this gun, there is also the manual safety is engaged. If I pull the trigger, nothing is going to happen. If the safety is disengaged, and if I pull the trigger, and again, this gun has been cleared, only by pulling the trigger will the gun actually discharge. Now, you see this little pin up here. This is what's called a drop safety. If for some reason this hammer were to come forward without the actual working of this trigger, see, the trigger is what works that. There is something built inside of there that will keep the hammer from striking. If for some reason the sear inside of here fails and this hammer is actually able to travel the distance, this device up here stops the firing pin from moving forward and will therefore prevent the gun from going off. The point being is that these guns are very specifically and very intentionally designed to only fire only when there is a deliberate press of the trigger. Now, this gun can also have the hammer cocked for a shorter second strike or second follow-up shot. But when you engage the safety on this particular model, the hammer will go back down, and then you'll have either safe or put it back in the fire mode, and then it'll be ready to fire again. But again, there are several mechanisms designed into the guns to keep them from going off without direct, deliberate action from the shooter. So if this gun is laying here by itself, if anybody has proper respect for the handgun or for any gun, it's not going to go off by itself. There has to be a very deliberate chain of events to happen before that can actually happen. Now I'm going to show you my next gun, which is a little bit different. This is a 1911, which is a single action handgun. Try to get safety on the other side here. This has a hammer and a manual safety. Now, again, same deal. We can't tell by looking if this gun is loaded or not. So we have to assume that it is loaded. The only way that we can know that it's not loaded is, and dropping the magazine is not necessary to check if it's loaded, but it does simplify the process a little bit. Because you pull the magazine out, again, same thing, magazine release right there. You can drop the magazine, and now you see there's no bullet in that chamber there. And hard to do this without covering, so now I would not recommend pulling the hammer back to rack the slide, but given the awkward position of my hands, this is just going to make the process easier. So the hammer goes back, finger off the trigger, and we pull back and we'll see inside of there again, there is nothing inside. It's clear, so this weapon is again cleared and safe. Now, in the case of the single action, if the hammer is down and if you pull the trigger, nothing happens. It only fires, and again, this has been saved, only fires if the hammer is back. Now, there's a manual safety on here. When the hammer is back, you can engage that safety and nothing happens. And this also has what's called a grip safety. Same deal. Nothing's going to happen until that grip safety is engaged. Multiple safeties on the weapon to make sure that it will not discharge on its own without deliberate, conscious action, which would involve actually cocking the hammer, gripping, and deliberately pulling the trigger. Now, one more thing. This is what's called a Series 80 gun, and I'm going to see if I can show you. Okay, remember that little firing pin block I showed you? This has one of those too. Right there. Of course, it's not going to focus for me, but right there it has the firing pin block. Same deal again. Only when the trigger is depressed will this thing go up. And when it goes up, see, there's no outside indicator of that firing pin block. But this is also what's known as a drop safety. If for some reason there is a round in the chamber, and if this gun is dropped on its muzzle, there will be something to stop the firing pin itself from moving forward and setting off the round. Very deliberate design to include multiple safeties to keep the gun from spontaneously going off unless you consciously, deliberately go through the steps necessary. Chamber in the round. If say there's a chamber in the round, safety off. You have to switch the safety off, and even then, even with the safety off, it still won't fire. Grip safety down, nothing. Only when you are gripping, so you can't get something caught in here by accident. It's not going to go off by itself. Multiple things have to fail in order for this to go off on its own without any kind of user input. Now the last type that we have here is, and this is a Beretta Nano. This is very close to what the Glock would be like. No manual safety. This one actually has no external controls whatsoever. Very simple gun, just a trigger, and there's a little thing called a trigger safety here. Now again, we can't tell by looking if this is loaded or not, so first thing we do is we want to drop the magazine. Oh, look at that. What do you suppose that tells us? Again, fingers off the trigger, and oh, there you go. Somehow I managed to get that all apart without killing myself or anybody around me. Stay. So, this again, there is no manual safety here. However, there is, and just to make double sure, there's no way I can lock the slide back on this, but you work the action a couple of times, make sure nothing's in there. Magazine is out. So, this trigger will not move unless you have this trigger safety, and Glock calls theirs a safe action trigger. I don't think Beretta has a name for theirs, but this is very simple to go off. This would be closer to, say, a revolver. There's no manual safety, nothing to stop the trigger from going off. However, there is, and if you see here again, same deal. It's going to have the drop safety. Oop, there you go. When you work the trigger, that pin comes up, and only when that pin comes up will the firing pin move forward. So if somehow this is able to move, again, it's mostly a drop safety to stop from the firing pin gaining inertia through a muzzle drop to discharge. Now, one of the main reasons why that's important to note that guns have these, most modern guns do, or any modern gun does. I can't think of an older one. The older 1911s, this is a Series 80 slide. The ones that are Series 70 do not have the firing pin block, so those may be susceptible to drops, muzzle drops that would cause some kind of an accidental discharge. But any modern gun is going to have some kind of a drop safety mechanism. The point of that being is that if you ever drop a gun, guns are designed to be safe when dropped. Never, ever try to catch a loaded gun, or try to catch a falling gun. If for some reason a gun comes loose and gets away from you, let it fall, let it hit the ground, then you can pick it up when you want to. Otherwise, if you try to catch a gun and if for some reason you catch on the way down, and if it's just a greater chance for you to get that trigger to go off. If you don't believe me, just ask Plexico Burris, he can tell you all about that. So, guns are inherently safe when dropped. Never try to catch a loaded gun. Now, for the last one here, I'm going to have to clear out a little bit of room here, so if you bear with me for one moment. Let's see if I can do this all in the space I gave myself. I'm going to take a look at one more scary weapon, which is, yeah, you can hear it already, right here. Funny story. This is a Troy Battle Mag here. This was I believe this would be the last thing I ever bought from Dick's Sporting Goods before they went nuts with the ban and pulled all their stock off the shelves and basically broke their contract with Troy Industries. So this is a rifle. Most rifles will have some kind of safety on there. This one here is in the safe position. If it's cocked, it will go into the fire position. So see if I can get, there we go. Okay, fire safe. Right now it's in the safe position. And again, with this particular weapon, if the safety is on, much like the 1911, as such, the safety will not go on unless the hammer is cocked. What does that tell me? That tells me that this gun is maybe in a state ready to fire if the safety is on. If there's no round in the chamber and if the gun is not cocked, there is no reason to have the safety on. So we have a rifle. Again, we keep our fingers off the trigger. First thing we want to do is remove the magazine. Usually there's a magazine release there, like so. Pull that out, and these are what they call snap caps, or just dummy training rounds. We couple in there. And on a rifle, there is the ejector port, and then there's going to be, on this particular one, there is the charging handle. Now, on this, the charging handle is back, which means what? That means that the bolt is actually back. So as we pull it forward, it goes forward. So work the bolt action back, and we see that there is nothing inside the chamber there. We know now that this weapon is clear with the dummy rounds. I'm going to put this back in there. And again, this will not fire unless the safety is in the fire position. So it says safe, fire. The only kind of gun that I do not have is a gun with a crossbolt safety, and that would usually be some kind of a button somewhere is located around the trigger area, usually up in front, and it's just a button you can push from one side or the other. If you push it one way, there's red showing, and the other way it's black showing. Most guns, if you see red on the switch, that means it's ready to fire. So you always want to assume that any gun is loaded, and you never want to have your finger on the trigger of a loaded gun until you're ready to fire. You want to make sure that the gun is pointed in a safe direction or in the direction you intend. Don't point at anything you don't intend to destroy. Anything, anyone, friends, family, whatever. Don't ever wave a loaded gun around, a gun that has not been checked. Even if it's been checked, don't get in the habit of pointing a gun at anyone or anything. If you think it's funny, if you think it's a gag, it's not funny, it's not a gag. These are very serious, very dangerous weapons that require a lot of care and respect. It's not difficult, but it just takes some common sense. I hope that this video has provided some insight as to how to treat a firearm, and I hope that anyone will take the time to familiarize themselves with the operation of a firearm and realize that while they are dangerous, that they are also very useful, that they can be very safe, very enjoyable, and if you ever find yourself in a situation where you need a firearm, they can save your life. Thank you very much for your time.